This channel talks about movies in slow, clear English to help you practice your English listening comprehension. What happens when a city's protector has to decide how far he's willing to go to stop a man who doesn't want money or power? Just chaos. Let's talk about The Dark Knight. Let's start with the story. A year after Batman first appeared in Gotham, he's working alongside Police Lieutenant Gordon and the city's new district attorney, Harvey Dent, to bring down the last of the city's organized crime families for good. Early in the film, a bank used by the mob is robbed by a group of men in matching clown masks. Is robbed is a passive construction. We use it here because the focus is on the bank and what happened to it, not on naming every single robber straight away. The robbery turns out to be the work of a criminal who calls himself the Joker, though almost nothing else about him is explained. He has no clear plan for the money, no real backstory, and no obvious goal beyond causing as much disruption as possible. Harvey Dent, meanwhile, is Gotham's most public symbol of hope. Unlike Batman, he works entirely within the law, and much of the city sees him as proof that Gotham doesn't need a masked vigilante to fix itself. Gordon's major crimes unit is widely suspected of being infiltrated by corrupt officers on the mob's payroll. Is suspected and is infiltrated both use the passive voice here, because the story cares more about the department's reputation and the danger it creates than about naming every dishonest officer by name. As Batman, Gordon, and Dent apply pressure, the city's remaining crime bosses grow desperate enough to turn to the Joker for help, even though they don't trust him and don't understand what he actually wants. The mob's money is deliberately burned by the Joker in one particularly memorable scene, rather than kept or spent. Is burned, again passive, puts the focus on the money and what happens to it, which makes the Joker's total lack of interest in wealth land even harder. This is really the engine of the whole film. The Joker isn't a criminal in the traditional sense. He's not trying to win. He's trying to prove a theory that under enough pressure, ordinary people, and even so-called heroes, will abandon their principles. To test that theory, he escalates. Attacks on the city become more public, more personal, and more difficult for Batman to prevent without breaking his own rules. At one point, several hospitals are threatened unless a specific target is handed over. forcing Gordon's department into an impossible position. Are threatened is passive here, since the focus is on the danger to the hospitals themselves, not on identifying every person responsible for making the threat. The film's emotional turning point involves Rachel Dawes, Harvey Dent's partner, and Bruce Wayne's oldest friend. Without spoiling exactly how it happens, a personal tragedy involving Rachel becomes the moment that finally breaks Harvey Dent. Harvey is corrupted almost instantly by grief and rage, transforming from Gotham's most trusted symbol of justice into a figure obsessed with random, coin-flip vengeance. Is corrupted puts the emphasis on what happens to Harvey, rather than on spelling out the exact cause first, which mirrors how suddenly the change actually happens in the film. From here, the story becomes less about stopping a string of crimes and more about a moral test. In one of the film's most talked about sequences, two ferries full of people are rigged with explosives, and each boat is given the choice to save itself by destroying the other first. Both ferries are wired with detonators, and each group is told that only one boat needs to survive. Notice how naturally the passive voice fits here. Are wired is told. Because what matters to the story is what's being done to these ordinary people, not the Joker's individual actions in that moment. By the film's climax, Batman has to make a final decision about how far he's willing to go, and what he's willing to let the city believe about him. To protect the idea of Harvey Dent as a hero, even after everything that's happened. In the film's final minutes, Batman is blamed for Harvey Dent's actions, and Gotham is left believing a version of events that isn't entirely true. Is blamed is passive because the whole point of the ending is about the story Gotham is told, not about correcting the record. Now, let's talk about how this story is told. Christopher Nolan shoots Gotham less like a comic book city, and more like a real, grounded, occasionally corrupt American metropolis. There's very little of the exaggerated visual style you might expect from a superhero film. Instead, it plays much closer to a crime thriller that happens to have a masked vigilante in it. The film also structures itself around 3 parallel character arcs, rather than one single hero's journey. Batman, who has to decide what kind of symbol he's willing to become. Harvey Dent, whose fall from grace forms the tragic backbone of the whole story. And the Joker, who barely changes at all, because his entire purpose is to change everyone around him instead. Alongside our grammar focus, this episode also has 5 vocabulary words for you, all pulled directly from the film's own themes, and from how people still talk about it today. Our first word is vigilante. A vigilante is a person who takes the law into their own hands, punishing crime without any official legal authority to do so. Batman is the most obvious example in this film, but the story also asks whether ordinary citizens copying him is actually a good thing for Gotham. Our second word is chaos. Chaos means complete disorder and confusion, with no clear pattern or control. The Joker repeatedly describes himself as an agent of chaos, someone who isn't interested in order of any kind, criminal or otherwise. Our third word is mastermind. A mastermind is someone who cleverly plans and controls a complicated scheme, often behind the scenes. Critics and fans alike frequently describe the Joker as a criminal mastermind, even though the film deliberately leaves his exact planning and resources a mystery. Our fourth word is escalate. To escalate means to become more serious, more intense, or more dangerous, usually step by step. The conflict between Batman and the Joker escalates constantly throughout the film, with each side's actions provoking a bigger response from the other. Our fifth and final word is sacrifice. A sacrifice means giving up something valuable, often for the benefit of someone else or for a greater cause. Batman's choice at the end of the film, accepting blame he doesn't deserve, is one of the clearest sacrifices in the entire story. Now, because this is an older film rather than a brand new release, let's talk about something a little different. How The Dark Knight's reputation has held up in the years since it first came out. Critically, the reception was extraordinary from the very beginning, and it hasn't really faded since. The film holds a 94% critic score on Rotten Tomatoes, alongside an equally high 94% audience score. An unusually rare case of critics and everyday viewers landing on almost exactly the same opinion. The film is still regularly ranked among the greatest movies ever made on sites like Letterboxd and IMDb, not just among superhero films specifically. Notice the passive voice again here, is ranked, because the focus is on the film's ongoing reputation, built up by millions of individual viewers over many years, rather than any single reviewer's opinion. A huge part of the film's cultural weight comes from Heath Ledger's performance as the Joker. Ledger died in January 2008, several months before the film was released, and his performance was widely seen as one of the most unsettling and complete villain performances ever put on screen. Ledger was posthumously awarded the Academy Award for Best Supporting Actor the following year. The first posthumous acting Oscar given out in decades. Was awarded is passive here, since the focus is on the honor itself and its rarity, not on the mechanics of the voting process. That same award season also became a flashpoint for a different reason. Despite its massive critical and commercial success, The Dark Knight was left out of the Best Picture nominees entirely, in a category that only included 5 films at the time. The film's exclusion was widely criticized online and in entertainment press, and is often cited as the direct reason the Academy expanded the Best Picture category to 10 nominees starting the very next year. Was criticized and is cited are both passive, because what matters here is the reaction itself and its lasting effect on the Oscars, not any one individual's complaint. Commercially, the film became a genuine cultural event. It crossed $1 billion worldwide, a milestone that was still relatively rare for any film at the time, let alone one based on a comic book character. Beyond the numbers, The Dark Knight is frequently credited by critics and film historians with changing how seriously superhero films were treated as a genre. Before it, comic book films were often reviewed as fun but disposable entertainment. Afterward, elevated or grounded became common ways to describe more ambitious attempts to follow its example. Countless later franchise films have since been compared directly to The Dark Knight's tone and structure, whether or not that comparison was actually fair to them. Have been compared is passive, because the point being made is about the film's lasting influence on the wider genre, not about any specific filmmaker's individual choices. Online, discussion of the film today tends to focus on a few recurring topics: Ledger's performance, the Ferry dilemma as a genuine piece of moral philosophy worth debating, and ongoing arguments about whether it's actually the best entry in Nolan's trilogy, or merely the most famous one. Nearly 2 decades on, it's still one of the most rewatched and rediscussed films of its era, regularly resurfacing in best films of all time conversations well outside of typical superhero movie discussion. Let's go through the passive voice examples from this video. We form the passive voice with a form of to be plus a past participle. For example, is robbed, was awarded, have been compared. We use it when the focus is on what happens to someone or something, rather than on who's doing the action. The bank is robbed puts the bank at the center of the sentence instead of the robbers. We also use it when we don't know exactly who did something, or when naming them isn't actually the important part of the sentence. Like, Batman is blamed for Harvey's actions, where the point is what Gotham is told, not the mechanics of who decided that. Try describing a moment from a film or show using the passive voice. Focus on what happened to a character, rather than on who caused it. Let's also go through our 5 vocabulary words from this episode. Vigilante. A person who takes the law into their own hands without official legal authority. Chaos. Complete disorder and confusion, with no clear pattern or control. Mastermind. Someone who cleverly plans and controls a complicated scheme. Escalate. To become more serious, intense, or dangerous, usually step by step. Sacrifice. Giving up something valuable, often for someone else's benefit or a greater cause. Try using one of these 5 words yourself, either to describe this film or another story where a character has to make a difficult, costly choice. So, what's the final verdict on The Dark Knight? Nearly 2 decades on, it's held up remarkably well. The kind of film that's just as effective as a tense crime thriller as it is a superhero story. Which is exactly why it's still discussed so far outside typical genre conversations. Heath Ledger's performance alone is worth the watch. But the film also succeeds because every major character is forced into a genuine, difficult choice, rather than a simple fight between good and evil. If you're curious why this film is still brought up in greatest movies of all time conversations, almost 20 years later, this is very much worth your time. Whether or not you'd normally call yourself a superhero movie fan. Did you enjoy The Dark Knight? Let me know in the comments on the video, or get in touch. If this helped you improve your English today, subscribe on YouTube, or follow along on Spotify or Apple Podcasts for more movies reviewed in slow, clear English. Interactive learning materials for this lesson can be found for free on engmoviereviews.com.